starting with PDF, PDF, which, as most of you, I would guess, know, originally was developed by Adobe, and around 2008 handed over to the ISO organization, so the International Standards Organization. And it is now an ISO standard. This is actually the only ISO standard number that I put on my slides. I know Christian has some later, but this is the only one I remember. It's also a very nice one. So PDF is ISO 32000, and what that means is that PDF is further developed and controlled by the ISO organization, and so no longer by Adobe. That is important from a standardization point of view, because it is difficult to have a worldwide standard that is built on proprietary company information, in this case, the PDF files format. I think I don't need to mention that PDF by itself is not enough to ensure that something is printable. The PDF file format is used for all kinds of things. If you would look up where Adobe earns its money with PDF, you'll find that most of it, if not, well, most of it, I think, is has nothing to do with print necessarily, but is enterprise and is things related to archival, things related to accessibility. So it's a very broad file format, and as such, there was work done at some point to standardize PDF for print for our market, and that became PDFX as an ISO standard. So the overall name is PDFX, and then there are multiple versions that were created throughout the years. PDFX1A is the first standard. That might sound like one, but standards organizations are very good at coming up with complicated names for standards. So PDFX1, PDFX as a group, PDFX1A as the first standard, is the first thing that was developed for print. Was actually developed on PDF version 1.3. And if you want to get an idea of how old that is, PDF 1.3 is the PDF version that Adobe at the time released together with Acrobat 4. I don't know how many of you still remember Acrobat 4, but it goes down a significant amount of time, somewhere around 1999. And actually, the work on PDFX 1A started around 1999 as well. Not in ISO yet at that point, but in some organizations, mostly on the North American side of the world. And it had to do with standardization of sending advertisements between a publisher and a printer. So exchange of advertisements. The X comes from blind exchange, because the concept was that you create a PDFX file as a creative professional, that you then throw it over the wall to a printer, and that the printer can print exactly what you had in mind without having to communicate with you. That is the concept of blind exchange, and that's where the X comes from. The ISO standard dates from 2001, at least the first version of the ISO standard, and then that was slightly updated, but not in a very big way, in 2003. So if you look at Adobe Illustrator, for example, and you would do save as PDF, and then you look at the standards that you can select, then you will see PDFX1A 2001 and PDFX1A 2003. They should only have the 2003 version there because that is the latest one, but that's why you have different dates. That's just a small revision. What is important to remember is this goes back to 1999. That is about 25 years ago today. So it is old standard. It is based on very old PDF technology, and that is, of course, a big part of what we're going to talk about. There was a significant update, I shouldn't really call it an update, a new part of the PDFX standard, if you want, that is called PDFX4. There were some things in between, but I'm only going to talk about the important stuff. Significant new version called PDFX4, and that is based on PDF 1.6, which you may say is a lot more recent, but it goes back to something like 2008 with, again, a small revision in 2010. So from a timeline point of view, there's something like 7 years between these two standards. And we'll talk a little bit about what the difference is between these two standards here. Again, what I want you to remember is that this is still a relatively old standard. And so if, as the Gantour group, because that is what we will do, if we will tell you that you should use PDFX4, please, and no longer PDFX1A, then don't think that we are trying to push you to use something that is brand new and just invented. It actually also already goes back something like 15 years by now. The PDF 1.6 that you see there belonged to Acrobat 7, in case you're wondering. So again, you can think of when did that appear. If I remember correctly, Acrobat 7 is somewhere around 2006 that was released. So pretty old again. And then, and this is the last PDF X version that I am going to put on here, we have something that is called PDF X6. And that is, again, a much more recent development. It is based on PDF 2.0, so a major revision of PDF. And PDF 2.0 was created by ISO. The 1.6 that we had for PDFX4 was still an Adobe development. But so 2.0 is created by ISO. And now we're talking about something like 2020. That is the date that was released. So this is much more modern, and we will also talk about what, as the Gantour group, we feel about PDFX6 and whether you should actually look at that or not. But these are the three PDFX versions that I wanted to put on here. There, like I said, are others. PDFX2, for example, doesn't exist anymore. It was retired. It was a nice idea, but not a really, not one that survived the time, I shall say. You have PDFX3, you have PDFX5, but remember the three that you see on this slide. This is what happened on the ISO side and on the PDFX side. On the other hand, we are the Gantour group, so what is important from our point of view is also what happened in the Gantour group, and we have Gantour group specifications or standards that, well, cooperate with PDFX. Each Gantour group specification is built on top of a particular version of PDFX. So we don't compete with what PDFX does. Instead, we embrace it and we build on top of it. The Gantour group started with a naming scheme that was something like 1v1 and then 1v2, 1v3. The first number refers to the PDF or referred to the PDFX version. So GWG 1v4 is built on top of PDFX 1A. And then the second number is the revision number, the version number. So the Gantour group in total released 4 revisions of a specification that was built on top of PDFX 1A. And that spanned a significant number of years. 1v4 is still used today, even though it is no longer what we think you should be using. It is a standard that is still used today. There have been some updates to that. and the most important ones were in 2015 and then in 2022. Those are built on top of PDFX4. And that is important. It means that it can take full advantage of some of the new stuff in there. We'll come to that in a second. And of course, from a timeline point of view, it's easy. It's called 2022, so it was released in 2022. So this is a relatively modern specification, but the differences between the 2022 version and the 2015 version are not that high. Both were built on top of PDFX4. So it is something that also has seen testing and a significant amount of use by people. That is the full slide. And well, what you could wonder about now is that there is nothing that is placed next to PDFX6. And so you could question, why is there no Gantt group specification that corresponds to PDFX6? And that's a very good question. And I'll start by confusing you a little bit more by showing you the next slide, and then we'll explain what the reasoning is behind that omission. But what I wanted to do in my second slide on history is simply put from a technical point of view, the differences between these PDFX versions next to each other. And so when we start with PDFX1A, as I said, the oldest version that goes back 25 years or so, we're in a world where PDF files can contain CMYK, gray, and spot color, and that's about it. Yeah, no transparency, because that was not invented at that time. It was not part, well, transparency was invented, but it was not part of the PDF specification. No layers, nothing much in terms of modern features that we know and use in PDF any day today. Very limited feature set. When you look at PDFX4, then you can see that there is some more stuff in there and really interesting things, and also big changes if you want. And the biggest change is probably, and we'll come back to that, that in PDFX1A, there is no support for transparency, and in PDFX4, there is support for transparency. And that means that in PDFX4, you don't need to do what is called transparency flattening. That is perhaps the biggest change between these two. And we're going to talk separately about that in a few seconds. What you also see, and that is of course also important, is that there are a lot more color spaces allowed in PDFX4. Essentially, anything that is color managed is allowed in PDFX4. Now, there are two things I want to add to that very briefly. One is that I hear people say sometimes that PDFX1A is not color managed and PDFX4 is color managed. That is not correct. The PDFX1A file is absolutely color managed. There is an output intent in there that characterizes the color that you have in the file, but it is limited to CMYK. In a PDFX4 file, I could also have images that are RGB, as long as there is a proper ICC profile attached to them. So it's not the difference between is it color managed or not. The difference is what is allowed in terms of color spaces inside of these two files. And then PDFX4 allows a lot more freedom. What you also need to know, and what I need to say, is that it is not because PDFX4 allows all sorts of things that the Gantt group automatically also allows it. If you look at the GWG 2022 specification, for example, you'll find a variant that is restricted to CMYK, and you'll find a variant that is restricted to CMYK, but also allows RGB images. No RGB text or line art, but yes, RGB images, again, as long as they are properly color managed, meaning there is an ICC profile attached to them. So as always, the Gantt group put some additional restrictions on top of PDFX. And the goal, of course, is to have higher reliability of files that comply to the Cantor group specifications. But clearly, you have more capabilities here, and Christian will talk more about what those are specifically. If we look at PDFX 6, based on 2.0, there are a number of very interesting features in there as well. The change is perhaps not as big from a pure PDF file format point of view than the difference you saw between 1A and 4, but there are a significant amount of new things that can be done, whether it's output intents per page or page range, or we talk about document part metadata, dpart, or the inclusion of much more information about colorants and separations in there. There is a lot of stuff that is potentially very useful. And that begs the question, of course, if it's so useful, why was there that hole on the previous slide? And is there no Gantt group specification matching X6? And why, in fact, are we not going to talk about X6 anymore during this, this webinar? Well, the reason for that is that the Gantt group from the very beginning has been a very practical organization. And that means that any specification that we came up with had to be usable in practice immediately. The easiest way for me to explain why we've not done anything with PDFX 6 is that if you go to Illustrator today and you save as PDF, as I said before, you have the standard section where you can choose which PDFX version you want to support. You'll find versions of PDFX 4 in there. You'll find PDFX 1A in there. You will not find PDFX 6 in there. While there is software and hardware that supports PDFX 6 and PDF 2.0 files, there is very little support for these file formats across the industry. And if you look at specifically at creative applications, there aren't many applications that can generate PDFX 6 files, and there are certainly not many applications that can generate PDFX 6 files that have some of these additional features. And so for the Gantt group, that means it is too early to make a specification that is based on X6. Does that mean we're not working on that, talking about that internally? No, we actually are, and we envision that at some point we will need to come up with a PDFX 6 compliant specification. We prepare for that, but we don't think the market is ready to actually release that specification right now.